So the Joshua Buatsi-Dan Azeez fight, which was set to take place this Saturday, has been cancelled, or at least postponed, because Dan Azeez has pulled out with an apparent back injury. I say apparent for the sake of boxing fans because they tend to be very skeptical whenever fighters pull out with injuries. They tend to think that maybe there's another reason, like poor ticket sales and what have you. And in the run-up to this fight, Eddie Hearn, who's obviously a rival of Ben Shalom, who's putting on Buatsi versus Azeez, kept saying that he wasn't sure if the fight would go ahead. Did he have some type of inside knowledge? Did he know that ticket sales were poor? Or was it actually a ploy by Eddie Hearn to try and create uncertainty in the public and therefore result in poor ticket sales for Ben Shalom in this show? I'll leave you guys to decide that. But what does this mean for Dan Azeez and Joshua Buatsi? Well, this isn't just an ordinary fight. It's a final eliminator with the winner getting a guaranteed shot at Dmitry Bivol. So if it was a genuine injury that Dan Azeez suffered, then presumably they're just going to reschedule it because there's too much at stake for them to abandon the fight, right? Again, the winner gets a guaranteed shot at the title. And I know that both Dan Azeez and Joshua Buatsi have turned down the Dmitry Bivol fight over the past year or so. However, they turned it down being voluntary challengers for Dmitry Bivol. Voluntary challengers usually have to sign a one-way rematch clause where the champion, if he loses, gets to have a rematch, whereas if the challenger loses, there's no rematch for him. And with Joshua Buatsi in particular, he would have been tied into a 3-fight deal with Eddie Hearn, with DAZN, etc., if he'd accepted that offer to fight Dmitry Bivol. He says he didn't want to be tied down to a 3-fight deal. He wanted to be on a platform that gives him greater exposure, which is Sky. And so that's the reason that he gave for turning the fight down. And again, fighting Dan Azeez, that's a final eliminator for Dmitry Bivol. If you become mandatory, the winner of that would become mandatory. You then get a guaranteed shot at Dmitry Bivol, and there's no rematch. If you beat him, you can just sail off into the sunset. On top of that, you get a guaranteed split. It's usually around 25%. Now, would it match what they were offered? I don't know what Azeez was offered, but Buatsi was offered somewhere in the region of £1 million for the Dmitry Bivol fight. Would it match that, his 25% against Bivol? Potentially. You could see Bivol maybe getting 3 million and Buatsi getting 1 million as a mandatory challenger. So generally, it's better for a challenger to become mandatory rather than taking a fight when you're a voluntary for the champion. So that's what I'll say about that. And we won't know whether Buatsi or Azeez were really up for that Dmitry Bivol fight until they fight each other and become mandatory. Because yeah, as mandatory, you get a guaranteed shot, but you don't have to take it. You can, if you want, abandon your mandatory position and go in a different direction. So if you are skeptical about Joshua Buatsi, because we know there's a narrative out there from Matchroom who say that Buatsi didn't really want to fight anyone good. He wanted to have all these British level fights. He wasn't keen on fighting Dmitry Bivol at all. That's the narrative that Eddie Hearn's putting out there, and you'd expect him to do that after Joshua Buatsi's left him, right? But we'd find out whether that's true if he became mandatory, if he beat Dan Azeez, and then, we'll see if he takes the fight. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below about Dan Azeez pulling out of the Joshua Buatsi fight with an apparent injury. And that's another thing. People give Joshua Buatsi a lot of stick for turning down the Bivol fight, but people don't seem to give Dan Azeez any stick for turning down the Bivol fight, which is a strange thing because they both turned it down. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section below.